All right, everybody, thanks for coming. How many people are first-timers here? Let's see. Oh, so mostly first-timers. Okay. Well, my name's Dave Wofford. I run Horse and Buggy Press. This is the 25th year of running Horse and Buggy Press. I started it in Raleigh and moved over to Durham in 2003. So I have a design studio and smaller gallery on Broad Street near the School of Science and Math, and just opened up this space right before COVID. So originally the plan was just to do a 2-month pop-up here and try and get some more people on the mailing list and follow me over to Broad Street. But had so much fun with the 2-month pop-up, decided to scale up and go big or go home and open up a second gallery and event space. So since the dreaded COVID opened up, we've opened and closed and opened and closed and spiffed up the space here and there. And one of the things that I'm especially excited about, come on in, welcome, is that we've got this stage here. So in addition to doing receptions, we're going to be doing 2, 3, or 4 artist talks, literary readings, music performances, and the like here. So we've actually got a whole bunch of them coming up. This coming Wednesday, David Minconi is going to read from his book, Step It Up and Go, The History of North Carolina Popular Music. He's going to be joined on stage by MC Taylor from his Golden Messenger. So that event is Wednesday at 7. There'll be a $6 cover for that. Most events that we do here are going to have covers with the money going to the artists, because we feel artists should get paid for their work and their time. Next Saturday, we've got another literary event where another Horse and Buggy Press book, hot off the press, will hopefully arrive on time. It's supposed to arrive Friday, and that book is called Swimming Through Peanut Butter, Making Do, Making the Best of It, and is a work of another local Barbara Dennis, who is 84, and her memoir covers a pretty adventurous and challenging life that took her through 11 different countries before retiring in Chapel Hill. For anybody that's interested in more of them, visit the website. On your way out after the event, there's a mailing list sign up by the door. So I just send out a newsletter once a month. And to give you the lay of the land here, the darker gray wall here is the main exhibit wall. This is the last day of From Fallujah, How Can We Know a Place? This was the photography exhibit that I put up for the Click Photography Festival, which happens the month of October every year. For people that are in the area and are not familiar with it, the Click Photography Festival has dozens of exhibits all over the Triangle, artist talks, portfolio reviews, and much more. So it's definitely worth checking out next fall, and hopefully we will be out of COVID by then. I'd also like to point out Margaret Sarter, who's here in the white shirt here. So Margaret is being thanked for 2 reasons. One, it was her idea to go with the darker gray wall to set off the main exhibit walls from the rest of the wall. And Margaret has a 2-venue exhibit that I've just extended to run through the end of the year. So on the stage wall behind me is Torn, A Year That Changed Everything, her mixed media newspaper pieces. And over at Broad Street, we have Torn, The Problem of Human Behavior, which are mixed media paper altered book pages. So both those exhibits are going to run through December 23, and we'll actually have a reception at Broad Street Saturday, November 13 from 5 to 7, which will be a Broad Street doubleheader, as John Bierman, who's going to have new paintings at Kremen Allen just down the block. And then Margaret will be given a presentation talking about her work here at PS 118 on Saturday, December 4th at 6 p.m. So again, there's a lot more events on the calendar, including a Chompy Quartet that will be free on Wednesday, December 1st. But today we're celebrating Barbara Kremen, who has 7 stories in The Figure in the Glass and Other Stories. Some of these have never been published. Some have been published elsewhere but have been out of print for a long time, including Tree Trove, which will be the second story that Barbara reads an excerpt from. I'm not going to talk too much about Barbara because Jeffrey Beam, here to my right, is going to give an introduction to share more about her life and her writing. And we're definitely very excited that this book is out. And as you can imagine, it's challenging getting any book reviewed in today's world, much less one who's not going to go out on a reading tour. So we appreciate any help directing people who are fans of adventurous and imaginative fiction to this book. And we've done two things with regards to that. So the book is for sale for just $22.95, and we're selling 6-packs for $110. So the idea is buy one copy for your library and then send 5 out in the world to people that are readers and see what happens. But I think that's enough talking. Well, I do want to point out one thing about Jeffrey Beam, I guess. So Jeffrey Beam is the author of many books of poetry, which are in the bookstalls here, and a long out-of-print Horse and Buggy Press book that was a collaboration with Ippy Patterson, seated in the front row, called An Elizabethan Bestiary Retold. And if anything good happens in the world, I'm going to find a sponsor so we can put out a second printing, or we would very happy to co-publish it with another publisher. There is one copy of that book floating around. All right, that's enough talking for me. I've definitely enjoyed working on the design of this book. Really enjoyed interacting with Barbara. Barbara lives over in Forest Hills, just about 1.5 miles south of here. And through the many stages of the book, it was very enjoyable working with the last edits, figuring out the dust jacket flap copy we wanted, which Jeffrey helped immensely out with. And I'm hoping that not only will we have the reading today, but maybe we'll do another one later in the winter or early in the spring for other folks. But again, everybody, thanks for coming. When the event ends, feel free to ask Barbara questions. After the event, we will pile up all the chairs in a few piles in the middle so people can move around more easily and interact with the art and each other. If you'd like to buy any books, you go see Hannah, who is over there running the camcorder, and she'll be selling books to the back of the jewelry table. And they have already been signed by Barbara. And again, if anybody needs to use the restroom, go out the front door, go down the hallway door, and it's way at the end, the second door on the left. All right, everybody, thanks for coming.
So if you've picked up, is it on? If you've picked up the book already, you see what a beautiful design Dave did, and Ippy contributed to the cover of the book. So we're both very happy to have a small part in making this book come to life. You can read the fascinating details of Barbara's life when you read your copy of Barbara's book, so I'm just not going to go into the details. I'll just mention that she arrived in Durham in 1963 with her husband, affectionately known by all of us as Kremen. How pleased he would be today. We grieve with Barbara that he is no longer with us to celebrate this moment. Barbara writes of the conundrums and shocks of the self, sometimes sought, more often not, triggered by fate. Her writing moves from the particular to the speculative, from detached observation to personal revelation, from a moment's beauty to flashes of wide wonder. She blends the symbolic riddles of folklore with precise scientific description to bear upon the broodings and discovery of identity. The stories bring to me to mind Swiss author Regina Ullmann, whose writer's voice Thomas Mann described as something holy, a description I don't mind using for Barbara's voice, too. But hers is clearly her own, as instinctively refined as a 19th century fiction, but also as psychologically innovative and fresh as anything contemporary. Not only do her characters breathe and live as if telling their tales from a chair across the room, but with equal subtlety and grandeur, the natural world becomes participant, even a character, as compelling a force as anyone or any incident the characters face or any inner life revealed. In the title story, The Figure in the Glass, she describes her main character's choral conducting style as recognizable for a lyric intensity leavened by a fine irony, an apt description of Barbara's own qualities as a writer. In her stories, the past and time rise up with a ghost-like aura to dissipate and regather in formidable and surprising ways, slowly becoming solidly influential, then suddenly as discernible as a dragonfly's wings in a microscope. My definition of gorgeous is not of the precious, but of the impeccable, the crystalline, of elegant and superior insight and inventiveness that does not wear itself on its sleeve. I am a sucker when it comes to gorgeous writing, and can forgive authorial mistakes with ease when overcome by such. But in Barbara's work, the gorgeous makes no mistakes, so I am doubly smitten. The closing novella, Tree Trove, a botanical fantasy tale for children and adults, stands on its own. Although I was able some years ago to easily convince illustrator Barry Moser that he should illustrate the work, unfortunately it never happened. I still hope someday an artist will illustrate a distinct edition of this entertaining and instructive eco-friendly tale. In particular, you must read it aloud. So one of my favorite pieces in the book is entitled Deceit of Snow. It begins this way. Who is telling this story? It is my wicked-tongued friend whose edges has aged, rather sharpened than smoothed. She tells it in a lapidary style necessary to contain, she says, romantic excess. She was in her own person, elegant dress and carriage, severe hairstyle, tiny pearl earrings, admirably contained. In the village they called her the widow, as one might say the baker or the stonecutter. She was widow by profession, 3 husbands buried, and some a 4th, though that was in another country. For that, and her single arm, and that she dealt in dreams, certain village gossips took her for a witch. I can picture her tall and stately striding at the head of the funeral processions, her black skirts flicking about her legs, so beautiful at first one was shocked and then immediately forgot her handicap. I knew her as Madame Fanaro, a person then in her 60s, still beautiful and wise. It seemed to me in the ways of the world. In those days I would visit her regularly, climbing the hill to her house in the heavy afternoon heat. At the siesta hour, no one was abroad. Houses slumbered behind dark shutters. Bees droned in the bushes. The garden gate was closed. No matter how carefully I pulled the bolt, it would crack like a pistol shot, scattering the lizards off the hot rocks. The gate swung wide on its creaking hinges. My feet crunched the gravel path. My spirits would lift and tighten like a pennant in the wind. A high, dense hedge on one side of the path guarded her privacy. On the other side, flowers rioted. From the tangled branches of pear trees sang invisible birds. An Egyptian cat in green stone sat tall among the cosmos, relic of some rumored Alexandrian affair. Shadows slanted across a leaden sundial. Summer has ended, she said. She had come from the house to meet me. Generally, she would be waiting at the tea table on the front veranda. It snowed last night on the mountains. I looked back at the mountain range that rimmed this green valley. Snow covered the jagged peaks. Its absolute white rendered the blue sky gaudy as a postcard. Snow on the mountains, she said moments later. The tea poured. Reading the story, one becomes aware, perhaps unconsciously, but overwhelmingly, how these introductory paragraphs prepare you, the reader, for an equally overpowering and enigmatic tragedy. Witness, a master at work. In the 1970s, poet Robert Bly frequently visited UNC. I was fortunate to interview him once for The Sun magazine. He was fond of saying at the time that in the world of literature, we never know who the true masters are. And sometimes we will never know. But at times they appear, we think, full-blown. On February 13th, we will celebrate Barbara's 100th birthday. You have before you what Barbara described to me, my husband Stanley, and Ippy and Neil Patterson a few weeks ago as her life's work. Not quite, because there's a lovely small press edition of her excellent poems, published in 1996, and some literary criticism you can find links to on Wikipedia. Many decades of hard, conscious careful, gifted work made these fictions. But as a romantic devotee, I'm going to stick with the myth that Barbara and her work arose in tranquil sovereignty, with karmic instructions to live it, write it down, live with it, as the public reveal was to be some decades ahead. I'm speechless before Barbara and her work, and my jabber is a usually laconic poet's lapidary attempt to contain an excess of praise. I raise my hands and my heart as I ask you to, in quiet invocation of such virtuosity, such wise and generous and gorgeous tellings, and that at last our doors of perception have opened so we, excuse my lapidary excess, might witness Barbara's writerly apotheosis. Please welcome Barbara Kremen and Figure in the Glass.
I keep wanting to take a bite out of it.
It's your friend. It's your friend.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Yes? I almost can't speak after that encomium from Jeffrey. Yeah, I almost can't speak. So I'm going to start to read from the later book that I read, The Figure in the Glass. And I'll start from the beginning. If you can't hear me, please raise a hand. Okay. It's called Child of Silence. The month is May. He has just stepped out of the pages of a book. He is wearing knickers, long socks, of course, a shapeless coat sweater, V-necked, buttoned. He's English. That's why the knickers. He is a young man with a face of immaculate calm. That's a quote. He is not Fabre, nor Réaumur, nor Swammerdam, though he might be. But though it is not now, it is not then either. It is another then. In the book, he is standing in the slow-flowing river, wearing wading boots. Of course, in the picture, the river no longer slowly flows. Reeds line the banks and overhanging branches. The sky is blue, the water gray-green. Green grow the rushes. No birds sing. He stands in the water. He holds no fishing rod, no apparatus of any kind. The book is not one most people would be reading. It's a field guide for people interested in identifying species. So the reader will know he's there for a purpose. And indeed, his whole stance shows purpose, composed watchfulness, patient, undistractable concentration, unconscious of self, hence that face of imperturbable calm. But here, on the cement floor, he is without his wading boots. He has pulled them off. They shipped water, and that is why he stepped out of the book, to dry his socks. He was, it seems, distractible after all. I can't see it from there. Oops. Excuse the interruption. He is puzzled at first to find himself standing no longer in a river, but in a narrow aisle with a concrete floor and walls of metal bookcases. The crammed with books, a windowless room as he goes to look at it, each aisle lit by its own fluorescent light. At the end of each aisle, a small deal table and chair. It is at such a table with pushed-back chair that the book from which he stepped lies open. The person who had taken his book from a shelf, the person who was reading at the small deal table and left it open there, has stepped away to sharpen a pencil, to go to the bathroom. He does not immediately recognize the basement floor of a library. In his non-pictorial state, he was familiar with libraries, enjoyed the quiet of libraries, as he enjoyed the quiet of streams, both conducing in separate ways to the appetites of his curiosity. But now he wanders, somewhat nervous, somewhat perplexed, down one aisle and up another. His image, this picture of a 25-year-old man, contains, as it must, the imprint of those years, but a click of the shutter, and all stopped still. Stranded in that moment, a moment of ineffable calm, a moment with no after. So he cannot know the color or the size or the title or the page of the book in which he dwelled. It would not have been something he needed to know. But now, when he hears footsteps on the hard gray floor, and looking round a corner of the metal shelves, sees someone in a long black skirt walking rapidly away down a corridor to a door, sees that person open the door and disappear, hurries to where his book had been and finds it gone, returned to his shelf, carried off by the reader of the book. He recognizes the gravity of his ignorance. He rushes after her, seen only from the rear, out the door, up a flight of stairs, into a small room with periodicals on racks, and a lackadaisical person sitting behind a desk. This person, back turned, buried in some mind-consuming task, is of no help, scarcely looks up, thinks someone may have recently left the room, seems anxious to return to his labors. He is desperate to find himself again within his book, to be standing in the stream with reeds and rushes and branches hanging where no birds sing. He himself is wait a moment. Sorry. To find himself is to say he has lost himself. Has he a self to lose? As for his size, he is, as he has always been, proportionate to his surroundings, and in the 3 dimensions any reader would implicitly assume. Biology library, displayed in letters of gold on the glass door, should he need to find his way back, to search, if that were possible, the shelves. The long corridor ahead is empty. It feeds into another corridor, this one full of people, many with books, none in a long dark skirt that flips around the ankles when you go out the door. Someone opens the heavy main door and he slips out. In the warm sun, people are lounging on the steps. Crossing the street, about a block away, a figure walks with rapid steps, a long skirt of some dark fabric swinging. Panting slightly, he has been running. Yes, he has breath. He accosts the woman with the book. "Please," he says, "if you don't mind, could I look at that book you're holding? I think it's mine. I mean, it's where I live." She, distracted in any case, takes him in with a frown. The knickers, the stocking feet, the accent. Can't decide between prank or insanity. Clutches the book more tightly and walks away. He stands irresolute. Then, with quite uncharacteristic violence, he pushes her to one side, tears the book out of her hand, and clutching it to his chest, runs up a hill, sounds of raised voices behind him, plunges through bushes alight with flowers, but this he does not notice, and running alongside a massive building with walls of stone, he sees a side door, partially obscured by shrubbery, and slips inside. The dim vast of a hall, with stone pillars and pointed arches, the ruby and sapphire glow of elongated windows that illumined not. He gropes his way down a side aisle to a small ancillary chapel, whose grisaille panes of glass let in a soft and filtered light. Enough to see by. Enough to see this is no guide to insect species. Its images are rather of lutes and viols, rebecs, psalteries, sackbuts. Here is no river bordered by reeds and rushes, where no birds sing. In the funk produced by this discovery, he fails to notice the steady stream of people filing into the chapel, quietly taking seats in chairs lined up before an altar. Too late for him to flee. He shrinks to the side to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. Who is now walking down the aisle? The woman whose book he had so uncavalierly snatched. Had she followed him here? Apparently not. She has taken her seat. She looks around. He quickly averts his face, as a child who thinks he is invisible when he covers his eyes, and finds himself in communion with the severe visage of a sculpted gentleman in a business suit, recumbent on the lid of a marble sarcophagus. Out of the folds of marble drapery, feet in dress shoes protrude at the one end, head and neck in coat and tie at the other. In this awkward position, with half-averted face, he confronts this silent interlocutor, simulacrum presumably as one with the physical body, that which remains beneath. There is something incongruous and unsettling in this encounter. Questions arise, questions distasteful and disturbing, and moreover, unanswerable. To avoid them, he turns his attention to what is going on in the room. Words were being spoken, many words, hastily and rather monotonously spoken, as though long since wearied of meaning. Sometimes the audience murmured along in rapid unison. Then came a change of tone. The speaker is now talking to the assembly. He's telling them of a life. Someone, a young woman in her prime, has in some pitiable and intractable fashion died. The speaker refers to his notes. It is clear he has no first-hand knowledge of this young person he so lavishly praises. He will have solicited information from family and friends, patched together a life harmonious and uniform. Devoted wife, charming hostess, lover of books, music, flowers, all things gracious, who raised orchids, who played cello in the local quartet, who was a member of this society, that book club, etc., etc. Friends had testified to her fortitude in her long illness, her sad and grievous end. Take solace, mourners, in remembering a life fulfilled in beauty. The discourse finished, all take their leave. They file past the family, murmur condolences, shake hands, embrace. It is very quiet. There are no outbreaks of grief. He does not see her in the receiving line. She must have hurried out as soon as the service was ended. The woman whose book had been snatched hurried out of the chapel, excessively irritated. She had endured, head bowed, the whole embarrassing ceremony, rigid with distaste, offended by the hypocrisy, aghast at her own complicity, and the narrowest of escapes. There's more, of course. So it was a little hard to figure out how long I could go. I mean, how long it would take to read any passage if you're given like 15 to 20 minutes. But I'm now going to read a book which I wrote much earlier than this one, many, many years earlier, in a totally different stamp. And this one is called Tree Trove. Tree Trove was a book ostensibly written for children, but it turned out it was written for children and adults because there was a lot of language in it that children probably couldn't really grasp. That is, it would play of words. And I'll start with the chapter called, there were two children, really I should tell you a little more. So there are two children, Hugh and Becca, who go on a, it becomes magical fantasy, but usually beneath the fantasy, the facts are real. And they have been led on by a tree, a talking tree, of course. They've been led on a quest to see if they could find the wise beech tree who could help tell them how to find a cure for the tree, the little tree that was sent them on this quest, who is injured. I'll read you the part in which Becca makes some discoveries. Becca woke one morning with a slight fever and a sore throat and had to stay home from school. The way she felt, not too sick and not too well, she didn't mind. She dunked her toast and drank her buttery tea and was content to drowse in her warm, sunny room with Persia lying on her feet. The birds carried on noisily outside. Becca slept. A finger of sunlight came in through the open window and went about curiously, touching the different objects in the room. It seemed to be looking for something. It smoothed the ivy growing on the sill, glowed on the mottled seashells on the dresser, sparkled at the fishbowl, causing the red goldfish to blaze out like jewels, and like a cat, leaped up on Becca's bed and lay there in a pool of its own light. Becca sat up and rubbed her eyes. I was hurried down to the meeting tree, she said. Oh dear, it's late. I'll never get there on time. A breeze puffed out the gauzy white curtain, and Becca saw a tiny object lazily tumble through the air and settle on her bed. It was a pretty, papery pair of inch-long wings, like curving oars to ply the air. At the middle, where they joined, were two hard, oval, bean-like bumps. She picked it up and held it in the palm of her hand. Wouldn't it be fun, she said aloud, if I could fly away with these? Why don't you? Said Persia from the bottom of the bed. Put them on and try. I guess you understand Persia's the cat. Becca didn't find it at all strange to hear Persia talk. She laid the wings against the back of her neck. And whether they grew larger or whether she grew tiny, for how else could I have gotten through the half-open window so easily, she said to Hugh later. But the next thing she knew, she had sailed through the window and was flying in her pink nightgown over the park. It was a beautiful ride, gliding and erratic, now coasting down one current of air, now tossed up by another, until she floated gently to rest on the ground at the foot of the meeting tree. The meeting tree is where the two of them, Becca and Hugh, used to meet and plan their activities during the day. Here you are at last, said the tree. I've been waiting for you all morning. I finally had to send Samara to fetch you. Its voice was deep, and the words seemed to roll and bounce against each other. I'm sorry, said Becca humbly. I came as fast as I could. I didn't know how late it was. I fell asleep. Trees never sleep, snapped the tree. They may hibernate. They may be dormant, which some might call it sleep. But at least they know what time it is. What big words it uses, thought Becca. wondering where it kept its clock. Time, went on the tree grandly. Of course we know the time. The time of year, my dear, and the time of day. I can tell time, said Becca, not wishing to be outdone. Look at my new watch. She held up her arm. She was so proud of her first watch that she wore it to bed at night. I wouldn't dream of telling time, said the tree in a shocked voice. With a creature so ancient, you can't be too careful. When time passes, I always bow. Then she'd be bowing all the time, thought Becca, but she was too polite to say it aloud. You've offended time somehow, you tactless child, the tree went on. Tell me, have you a clock that strikes the hour? That would certainly do it. No, said Becca hesitantly. Then her eyes lit up with a malicious gleam. It's my piano teacher. He's always telling me to beat time with my foot. Mr. Schloff was not one of her favorites. The tree gave a shriek. You unfortunate child. Now come closer, and I will tell you a secret. It lowered its voice to a piercing whisper. We never tell time. Time tells us. Or rather, light does. Light is time's messenger. Tells you what? Light warns us when winter is near, and it is time to shed our leaves. Light tells us when it's safe to put them out again. Light signals the time to grow and the time to flower. Light wakes me up in the morning sometimes, said Becca, though mostly my mom has to call me. But I don't like to sleep in the dark, she confided. I have a night light in my room. No wonder you're so pale and your leaves are so yellow, said the tree. That would never do for us. The least break in the night darkness would throw our whole schedule off. I think that's probably a good place to stop, you see. No. I will stop there. So that is it, I think. Thank you.